You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Welcome to the show. I hope you're having a terrific day so far. Our guest today is Jennifer Farmer. Jennifer is an intuitive, a medium, and a spiritual teacher whose greatest passion is empowering you to embrace joy and inner peace through the deep healing of spiritual readings, teachings, and guided meditations. And that's how I first found out about Jennifer, was through one of her guided meditation videos. It was probably about 2 years ago, maybe between 2 and 3 years ago. And I was scrolling through YouTube, looking for some videos of guided meditations that I felt would really resonate with me and be of help to me. And if you've ever done this, maybe you can relate to this experience. I would find titles of videos that sounded appealing, and I would look at the descriptions and think, yeah, that sounds good, and click on them. And then I'd hear the voice or the presentation and think, no, I don't find that soothing, or I don't find that calming, or I don't like the voice, or I don't like the sounds behind it. Not that it's bad, it just doesn't work for me. It'll work for somebody else. And then I would search and I'd find another one and I'd see, wow, this has been viewed, all kinds of different times. Maybe that one will work. So I'd click on that and then the same thing would happen. I'd think, no, it's not that it's bad, it's not working for me. And then eventually I found one called Healing Meditation. It's an 11-minute video from Jennifer Farmer. And I clicked on that, and immediately my physiology just kind of calmed down, and I was immediately able to feel more relaxed, and I liked the tone of Jennifer's voice. I really appreciated the presentation that she offered and how the whole thing was put together. And so that was my introduction to Jennifer. And now it's interesting for me to think about, she calls it healing meditation, which makes absolute sense given the work that she does, helping people heal grief and loss and access other parts of their spirit. For me, I was thinking about something that had a little bit more of a physical manifestation, where my health wasn't really great at that time. And in particular, it was really bad eczema, skin condition that I've struggled with at times through most of my life, but was really bad back then. And I was looking for anything that I could do to just kind of calm down, lower sort of any inflammation in my nervous system or inflammation in my immune system. And so that's what I was thinking of in terms of healing. And I didn't even tell her that when we were speaking. That's why I mention it now, is that the healing meditation worked for me there. Because, physical and spiritual all seems to be intertwined, and that comes up a lot in the conversation that you're going to be hearing with Jennifer in just a couple of moments. Another one of hers that I like a lot, not to the exclusion of any of her other videos, but this is just another particular one that I've spent a lot of time with, is called Essential Meditation. It's 13 minutes long, and it really helps me to relax, and maybe it'll do the same for you. So I'll post the links to both of those videos on the show notes blog post for this episode, which you can find at noscheduleman.com. KevinBulmer.com also takes you to the same place. This is episode 26, if you want to look for those. And on top of that, Jennifer really generously is offering for free one of her slightly more advanced meditation programs. It's called Healing Grief Meditation. I should say videos instead of programs. But she has opened that up so that listeners to this podcast can access it for free for a limited time. It's called Healing Grief Meditation. And again, you can find that link on the show notes of this episode's blog post, episode 26, at noscheduleman.com. Now, as I mentioned, Jennifer does just incredible work as a spiritual teacher, an intuitive, a medium, and she helps people heal grief and incredible loss, and she helps them to be able to let go and find an area, a process of rebirth. And to that end, she talked about her own process as well, and one of the times in her life that she really struggled and what she had to do to be able to go through her own rebirth process and to renew her spirit and soul, and what she had to do to move on, and how she eventually found herself into this field. I found it a fascinating discussion, so it was difficult to pick out just a few key points to be able to share with you at the outset. But here are a few of them that I wrote down when I listened back to it. Number one, she talked about deciding. And choice comes up so often in the course of this podcast. I thought it no coincidence that it would come up again here. She decided to view the world as a friendly place. Now, keep in mind the backdrop here of how much grief and loss she is exposed to through the people that she helps try to heal with her gifts. So she's decided to view the world as a friendly place, putting to use effective tools to maintain and nurture that view. Things like counseling, meditation, prayer, action, and service to others. But again, it comes back to being a choice. But if you're struggling right now, or if you know somebody that's struggling right now, listen for what Jennifer has to say about some of the even really basic things that you should be looking to maybe do, like, for instance, just getting up in the morning when you're really, really down. She paints a couple of scenarios that you may be able to relate to. But if you're a little bit beyond that and just looking for some ways to feel more positive and to nurture that, counseling, meditation, prayer, action, service to others is a great one. Number 2, conversely to what I just mentioned, she notes how some people choose to come at life through a lower energy frequency. These kinds of people use things like blame, guilt, and regret to shape their view. Now, in those cases, Jennifer suggests that such a person is, quote, learning to connect to life through suffering. And she suggests that while each of us will encounter some form of suffering along our journey, how long we suffer can be optional. I think that's really, really powerful. And things like blame and guilt and regret being associated with learning to connect to life through suffering really jumped out at me from what Jennifer shared in this conversation. Listen to it and see if you feel the same way. And number 3, she shared 3 main things that she feels are essential tools for success and accessing your spirit and feeling more fulfilled. They are awareness, knowing what program you're running on. Are you taking the view that the world is a friendly and a good place, or are you connecting to life through suffering? So awareness of your program. Number 2, learning how to control your mind. What is your mindset? How are you employing tools like some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, meditation, service to others, counseling? How do you control your mind? And the third main thing is the ability to let go and renew, which is sometimes easier said than done than others. There's so much else that she talked about, like the term and the skill of energy management, the awareness of energy management, and how she said at a spirit level, we're all the same. I also noted when she shared that she gets messages when she's in a calm state. I found that really interesting, as I rarely feel inspired or intuitive when I'm frantic or exhausted. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. It was such a pleasure to talk to her. Here's the chat with Jennifer Farmer on the No Schedule Man podcast. Jennifer, I'm going to start with a somewhat unimaginative question, but I think it's important to ask so that we set the stage for the rest of the conversation and where we're going to go. And it's this, is that on your website, you're described as an intuitive, medium, and spiritual teacher. What can you tell me about what that means? How would you describe that?
Oh, great question. A lot of people aren't familiar with those terms unless you're in the personal growth movement or the spirituality movement. An intuitive is someone who can perceive information, pick up data, read energy. A medium is someone who can act as a channel for spirit people to work through that have already deceased. And then a spiritual teacher, my preview or my example of that is I strive to live a spiritual life based on discipline, reading, and sharing. And so from that perspective, I'm a teacher who walks my talk, who does the work, and then helps other people along the journey find their spiritual path.
Where were you in your journey, as best as you can recall? What was your life like, and around what age did you discover that you were carrying some of these gifts with you?
I knew something was really interesting, probably in my mid-teens, because I could watch TV and know things before they happened. I remember when I was a child, I could see somewhat of a hologram of people with me. Sometimes I felt them. And it wasn't really in an environment that allowed, like, we didn't talk about that, right? Because I grew up fundamental Christian, so nobody talked about seeing people. And then sort of my big catalyst, I would say, is after I had back surgery, where my gifts really began to turn on. So at some level, I had an awareness of my abilities. I didn't really understand or know what to call them. I had a knack for being at the right place at the right time. And people just thought I was lucky. Now I know that's more of an intuitive flow, and everybody's got that. Everybody's got an intuitive connection to spirit, and I'm just somebody that uses it as a way of life.
Let's go back to that time in your teens if we can, because I'm interested, as best you can recall, Jennifer, in what you felt your reaction was when you became aware that you were noticing some of these things. I mean, how do you even have an awareness of the awareness, when you don't have any context in it, and you described what was it like, and how are you feeling about it?
So a couple of things. Like, a friend of mine, she and I were really close, and she and I could telepathically communicate. And an example would be, I would tell her, what she was thinking, and we would have a communication around that. So, like, I could walk in a room and read her mind, and she and I would talk about it. And she would say things like, "Jennifer, man, you're different. You're way different than us." And so it was more so of somebody else bringing it to my attention that I was different, more so than me thinking, "Oh, I have something special here." And I kind of was okay with it. Like, I felt like a part of me, that was a good part of me, that I had those abilities. I wasn't scared by it by any means. The only time I was really scared of anything was really when I was very small, 5 or 6, and I could see in my room when I was by myself, I could feel and sense people in my room with me. And that was pretty uncomfortable. And the way I really kind of learned to deal with that is I just played music all the time, so it would sort of shift my energy or shift my awareness.
Trying to decide which of those avenues that I would like to pursue with you. Well, let me go back to the situation that you described about communicating telepathically with your friend. Even knowing that you used the phrase "reading her mind." Mm-hmm. This will probably sound like a basic question, Jennifer, but how did you know that that's what you were doing?
She'd say, "That's exactly what I was thinking." It was her response.
So, I mean, would you have, and forgive me, but I'm going to try to be the voice of some people that are maybe listening that don't understand exactly how this works. So I appreciate you being patient with me.
Yeah, no,
was it a situation where you're getting words, images, and thoughts that you are aware are coming from this other person, and verbalizing it back to her to say, "Is this what's going on with you right now?" and her affirming that?
Yeah. Or it could be as simple as, "Let's go to McDonald's." She'd say, "I was just thinking McDonald's." It's very simple. And, husbands and wives and partners that have been together, they have this ability, they just don't really know it, or they're not aware of it. It's so common for someone to be thinking about dinner, and then the other person is thinking about dinner too, and then all of a sudden they think that's a coincidence. No, it's because they were tuned into each other's minds. That's telepathic. That's telepathy at its very best.
So you described about when you were 5 or 6 and you were sensing other people in the room, and that you were able to override that, my word, not yours, but with the use of music.
Yeah.
So I guess that leads me into, with the ability to sense all that energy and that presence and actually channel through the other thoughts telepathically of other people, is that something that you're consciously able now, Jennifer, or even were back then you used music, to be able to turn on and off at some level?
Oh, yeah. And it's important but we have to live a physical world. Like, we're here to live the physical life. That means experience food and love and sex and happiness and real physical world things. And in a spiritual level, like I don't want to be reading people's thoughts and energy all the time. I have no desire to do that. Some of that happens automatically, but I've learned to turn my psychic antenna up or down, just like learning how to take my shoes on and put my shoes off. The best way now to describe it is when I was working in corporate America, which I did for a long time and I enjoyed it. Had this mental concept that as soon as I shut the door, when I left the building, that my job was to mentally leave the work there. And so I'd practiced that very early on. And so when I came into the office, I'd open that door and then I could mentally turn on work. And so that was a way to discipline my mind or mental focus. It's not uncommon for me to go places and pick up energy, but it's not like I'm actively going out to go and see what somebody's thinking in the grocery store line. Sometimes it's just part of their field of energy that I can receive, but I don't want to be psychically turned on all the time. It's just a lot to take in.
Let me give you some context about where this next question is going to come from. The idea of awareness, and I guess more to the point, Jennifer, self-awareness. So for me, anxiety was something that plagued me to a great degree up in through my 40s. I'm 42 now. And that took a lot of work to be able to get a hold of those thoughts and those voices that were inside my own mind and what I was telling myself, and to build an awareness of those thoughts. So I'm curious then, while you're talking about being able to sense energies and thoughts from others, how, if at all, that maybe translates back into an awareness of yourself to either help or hurt your own experience. What would you say to that?
So first of all, I do want to share with you about the anxiety pieces. When I was in my teens, it was I would have moments that I would have panic attacks in different places, in different situations where I would hyperventilate, where I couldn't catch my breath. And some of that's more about how energy comes in, and I learned to calm myself down from that. And sometimes anxiety is the building of an energy of what's to come, meaning things in your life. And sometimes it's just unresolved fear or old ideas that have to relate to scarcity or being safe. And from a personal level, I've had to work through a lot of my own dysfunction to have the kind of clarity that I have. And so everything from learning what dysfunction is, how it controls my thinking processes and my emotions and my feelings, I've had to really become aware of those things. And as I have grown in personal development, I have also grown spiritually in my ability to perceive with clarity. So like when people come to me for classes and such for spiritual development, I always have to partner that with personal development, because without the perspective of how you perceive the world, because that's what telepathy, perception, psychicness, it all has to come through the eyes of how we look at life. It's filtered through that way. And so if I'm in a place where I'm angry, it might be harder for me to perceive and receive things accurately without me jumping to a conclusion about things, or fearful. So there's a lot of, I would call it mental gymnastics that has to happen in self-awareness to have really good clarity.
So it's interesting listening to you give that description, and thank you for that, Jennifer. I'm led to then thinking about how there's a difference between thought, what somebody else is thinking, or what their, I'll say, conscious level of attention is on at the moment. And then the next level down, I guess, that we would call what? Maybe mindset, sort of your overall level of belief.
Programming. It's your programming. It's your data. It's your data program about life and how, are you working on an old, millennium operating system, or are you working with something that's, are you working in the world's a friendly or an unfriendly place? And I do believe that even though everybody has a psychic ability, I do believe everybody has an intuitive sense. We were all given those gifts from the start. They're just part of what makes up the human spirit. That the intelligence that we must use is how we perceive life and use our logic side to look at life as either a friendly or a hostile place. And Wayne Dyer said that years ago. And, I made a decision early on that I was going to choose that the world was a friendly place. And for me, that was a personal decision that I made. And that's my intention on how I perceive the world. Now, that doesn't mean I don't pick up bad stuff happening or that I don't feel things like, an example would be the football game last night. I watched the Cowboys play. And right before the Cowboys came on, I'm sitting there watching TV. All of a sudden I heard, ooh, upset. I go, oh God, don't be bragging about anybody. Please don't be zealous, because the Cowboys are so good. And I asked my boyfriend at the time, I said, so what's the spread on this? And he said, it's 3.5. And so I said, there's going to be an upset. I don't know. There's going to be an upset. And so this morning I found out that they won, but they didn't meet the spread. So the people who bet on the Cowboys and bet the spread, they lost. It was an upset. And that's an example of I'm sitting at the TV and I start to perceive something. I didn't ask what the game was going to be like. I'm like not excited that I got like that, but that's an example of how it works, how premonition, how psychic abilities will work for me.
What about a time where you do pick up something dark or uncomfortable that does just show up?
Yep.
What do you do with it, and how do you manage it?
I usually just make a note of it. Like, I was pretty sad that the Cowboys might have lost. That's not good. But I will say sometimes it kind of, when I get those messages, it's usually when I'm in a very calm state. I'm usually cooking dinner or washing dishes. An example would be early May of this year. I was making dinner and I felt and I sensed another 911, 9/11, and it stopped me in my tracks because I'm sitting there making dinner. And so I just wrote the name and the date down. I wrote down what I got. And then a week later, there was the France bombing. And then a week later was the Orlando shooting that happened on terrorist soil or on a U.S. soil. And so what I do with that, I usually try not to panic. I usually just write it down. And I just sometimes pray about it. Like, whatever that is, I just hope that the people that are in the right places get the right messages to be where they're supposed to be. Those aren't easy things to handle. I can say when the tsunami hit in 2000, I think it was 2005. I think it was 2000. No, it was the year the tsunami hit, and with the radioactive stuff, where the nuclear factory went crazy and dumped all that nuclear crap in the water. 3 days before that, I actually felt like I was going to die. I actually was so overwhelmed with the feeling of death that I was sitting there writing my will. And that was, 3 days later, I find out that, here comes, the radioactive and nuclear, the tsunami and all the stuff that happened with that. So those are kind of three examples of things, how they come to me. And obviously I feel crazy when they're happening. I'm more comfortable with them now than I was a long time ago. Because I always feel like if we are attuned to the now and the vibration of the moment, that the intelligence that connects all of us, that there's some frequency that we are all attuned to on a spirit and soul level, and we probably should be getting those kind of feelings in psychics. And I always think about the Aborigine population who they use telepathic abilities all the time. And so this is not new. It's just we're in a world that nobody really talks about it. People are kind of afraid of it. And God, I wouldn't want to live my life. That's how I know it's going to be a bad restaurant. Like when I'm going to go get something to eat, I'm like, oh no, this is not going to be good. We got to go somewhere else. Like I rely on that intuitive side of me to guide me and, partnered with logic, with my travel, with my trips, with my feelings about things. It's just, I think it's a gift to help us enjoy our life and be fulfilled, but it's also meant to help us and put us in the right place at the right time.
You started to touch on a little bit about what I was going to ask next, and I'm going to touch on that and then steer us in another direction from what I was thinking. But what I was going to ask is, having said that, you chose a long time ago that you wanted to believe that the world was a good place. And, I'm wondering for somebody that's listening to this conversation, Jennifer, to hear you describe and for them to recall at their level the really deep, profound darkness and sadnesses of the events that you described, and you having to experience those in advance of them or some level of it. But you touched on it, on the light part of that being that sense of connection with whatever energy it is that binds us all. Maybe I'll finish that thought before I take us on to the next one, because it was just going to be steering people not steering because that sounds manipulative, but guiding toward, if someone says, gosh, okay, you can say that the world is a good place, but those things are happening and they're so dark and they're so intense and they're so hurtful. How then does one recognize that those things are going on in the world, and then even to be able to experience that intuitively as you've described and still believe that the world is a good place?
Well, I feel like it's a personal decision that you have to choose how you're going to perceive things. Now, that doesn't mean life isn't hard. I have big abandonment issues. I have that's why I'm dedicated to grief and loss. That's how come I work with people that have experienced great loss, is to be a light in that world. And so I do believe that there's a polarity of experiences. Some are good, some are not so good. And I feel like the decision for me to make, what kind of energy am I bringing into this, my world, is I want to bring the best light I can into those even dark experiences. Life, we were meant to find, we weren't, these are personal philosophical views that I have, but I don't believe we were made to suffer. I don't believe we were created just for the point of suffering. I believe suffering is a part of the human experience. I don't particularly like it. I don't suffer well, but I have tools to get through it. And those necessarily aren't intuitive tools. Those are just practical tools like professional counseling, discipline, meditation, prayer, action, service to others. Those kinds of things help me move through those chapters of my life and helping others move through chapters of theirs. But there is a season of cycles in the human experience, just like the seasons. And is one better than the other? No, but I really prefer the summer and the spring better than the winter, right? And so I feel like it takes a well-rounded perspective. It's not all good, it's not all bad, but what kind of energy I want to bring to any of those of life experiences is I want to be a channel of light in those. And for me, I want to be a friendly channel of light. How other people choose to respond through anger, frustration, blame, guilt, remorse, regret. People that live in the lower senses of energy, obviously they're learning to connect to life through suffering. And, suffering is something that we all get to experience, but how long we suffer can be optional.
I would like to give you the opportunity to describe the reverse of where we were, or maybe the opposite of where we were a couple moments ago. And maybe I can set it up by giving you just a real snapshot of my own personal experience, because I happen to agree with you. I believe the same thing. That I'd rather live with an open heart and to be naturally trusting and think that things are good. And you just accept that by doing that and staying open, that you're leaving yourself vulnerable to feel some pain sometime. But it's far more worth it for the rewards that come on the other end of things. And so as an example, Jennifer, when I have something that would be considered dark or bad news, I tend to be able to quiet things down, slow things down, and maybe use some of the tools like what you just described and be able to deal with that without getting necessarily overly emotional about it, I find. But when I have those moments where I feel just completely locked in, it could be as simple as a certain piece of music at a certain time, or just a really deep feeling of appreciation for something. That's when my emotions will overwhelm me. And it'll start to manifest in a number of different ways, tears and difficulty speaking, and I get overwhelmed with the positive stuff. So I'm curious about what it's like for you to be so more deeply connected to some of those other layers of communication and energy. You've talked about some of the really dark events that have happened and your premonitions, if I can use that word of that. Can you describe for me the other side of that, when you really feel locked into the light that's amplified by wherever that's coming from the rest of this human experience or spiritual world? What does it feel like?
Well, I just want to make a comment, because the everyday cycle of my life, meaning I'm sitting in the kitchen and I'm feeling the negative side, or what I perceive will be a bad experience, those don't stick with me too much. The only one early on, obviously, me feeling like I was going to die and writing didn't know it was the other side of humanity, on the other side of the earth. But the feelings of joy that arise from being connected to spirit or intuitively, it's the only sense of wholeness I've ever known. The whole sense of being glued together from the inside out. If I was going to describe how the moments of joy elate me, my life works, and as an intuitive and as a psychic and a medium, that's not all of who I am. That's just part of what I do. But as a result of me having those abilities, both personally and professionally, I am more fulfilled as a person overall. So therefore, I have more to give to the earth. Like, I really don't want for anything. I have my needs met. I feel connected to myself and to others. I feel like if I died today, that my experience with spirit, that I've maybe helped people find hope, that there's something beyond this physical world, that they have learned how to start over and find their own spirit, and that they can trust and know that they're at the heart of themselves good. And leaving that behind is more important to me than what car I drive or any material success. Things are just things, but I've talked to people with loads of money that are miserable and haven't felt their spirit or haven't felt connected to intuition, and they've relied on logic their whole life, and they're empty. They're just empty vessels. And so I would say feeling whole, feeling connected, feeling alive on all cylinders, that's the biggest gift of all, from being tuned in and turned up.
What are some of the things you think, Jennifer, people can do? And maybe listening to a conversation like this is one of the things that if somebody's listening now, I'm going to assume that they've shown an interest in exploring different ideas and trying to reach out to some of the things that you just discussed. But what are some of the things that, when you come across people that have experienced deep amounts of grief and really, really heavy loss, what are some of the things that you can initially point them to just give them even a little bit of light to start to follow?
Well, the way I would work with somebody who is dealing with grief, or what I would suggest, might be different than someone who's just going through depression or circumstantial depression because of a job or because of a relationship ending. For those folks that have depression because of outside circumstances or struggled with it their whole life with no connection to grief, number one is I would start to become aware of how you're thinking is like what your mind is telling you. Like regardless of any spiritual book you read or personal development book, there's three main things that are going to be tools for success. The first one is awareness of what you're thinking and what program you're operating from. The second will be learning how to control your mind through mind focus or meditation. And the third thing is going to be more so about the ability to let go and to renew in spirit. Those are things that, getting started, if you want to know about your psychic abilities, or if you want to start to notice coincidences, when you're thinking about someone and they call, that's an awareness. When you're sitting in front of the TV and you get a feeling about how the show's going to go and you haven't seen it or nobody's talked to it, start to look at how many times you're right. Start to notice what you pick up underneath your physical eye perception. That's for psychic awareness. For personal growth and for people that are dealing with grief, just getting out of the bed is the first step. Really finding a reason. And I always encourage people that have got grief, that are dealing from loss, just getting through it, on the other side with some sense of lack of, you don't want self-sabotage is huge in grief. Anger is huge in grief. Getting through those cycles of grief and keeping your relationships intact is a goal. But getting animals, getting someone to get out of bed for, that can be so powerful. Sometimes we can't live for ourselves, but we can live for others. I mean, and I'm really speaking to this is a tough time for people. I've talked to a lot of people that have lost children, and those are very difficult circumstances. And look, those are things people never get over. People can lose a loved one, people can lose a parent, and someone close. But I've noticed that people that have lost children, there's something that goes with them, and the person really is significantly not the same anymore. And so for people that are struggling with that kind of grief, just remembering to eat, breathe, shower, get up, make a phone call, and begin to ask for a power that's within you to help you find a way to live again. That's the way you start.
I wrote down the three things that you mentioned, and I just find myself listening to you there, looking at the one of the ability to let go and comparing that with something as awful as the thought of losing a child. And I guess I was going to ask, how do you let go of that? You've already answered it. You don't, but then is it then, Jennifer, that you try to begin the process of letting go of the idea of who you felt you were or what your overall experience was, so that you can begin to move on anew in some fashion?
Yeah, and I've got, the best way is to learn how to relate to life with a new lens. The only way I can only relate this personally. I held on to anger for my dad's grief. And every time I thought about my dad, every time I thought about people dying, every time I was afraid of losing someone, it always could go back to me being pissed that my dad drank himself to death and left me. You see? Mm-hmm. That was, and I've had to let go of that perception, and I've had to change that perception. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it allowed me to move from a place of anger and holding on to him from a lower feeling of frustration to now I look for signs that my dad is with me. Now that I know he's at peace, he's not drinking himself to death. He's actually, the times that I've felt his presence with me, I mean, he's sober, he's happy, he's with his family who he loves, which he didn't have any of that here. And so for me to let the idea that I had to hang on to that vision of him was the only vision that I had. It took me a lot of years because I thought at some level if I let go that I was mad at him or I was mad at God for him leaving, that I would lose him. And it's somewhat of a bridge of faith to know that if you find a way to let go, that there'll be a new, better, stronger perception that can take root in our spirit to help us find a different way to live with more joy and happiness, even though we've experienced great loss.
When you say that you feel his presence,
mm-hmm.
Can you describe that for me? And where do you perceive he is or how he is?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, for me, everybody's loved ones connects to them differently, okay? So how they perceive things, some people get them in dreams. I rarely get a dream from my dad, but I've also asked the spirit world not to come in my dreams because I work in the spirit realm all day long, so I just sometimes need a break. But when I feel my father, I will feel his presence. It's like the way I like to describe it is I'm sitting at my desk and I feel in my mind's eye a vision of him that I don't put there. It just kind of comes to me. Sometimes I will get like a real life message. My dad doesn't always show up on time. He didn't quite do that on this side either. But some of the more cooler things, sometimes I get a little chill whenever I feel his presence with me. But with one of my best friends who's in spirit, I don't feel her that way. I actually will be meditating on something and I'll hear her words that she told me, things that she said to me. They'll come across my mind, things I would never say. And I'll just reach up and say, hey, Mary Lou, I love you. I miss you too. Because I'll know that presence. Sometimes I've had physical interactions where things beyond my understanding happened. Like one of the cooler things that happened this year, probably take me up. I can probably hang on to this one for a while. My son is getting married, and I said, Dad, see your grandson? See how cool he is? Do you know what's going on? Just let me know, what things are going on. We're moving on, and it's all good. And I usually do that on the way to the car. It's odd. I do it in a place of stillness. There's no mistake that somewhere even biblical it said, be still and know that I'm God. And that's because if we're still, that we can perceive. 3 days later, I'm in the ladies' room in my house. Nobody shares that room. Look down on the floor, and there's a little gold charm with a J on it. And an angel. Well, my nickname to my dad was Angel Baby. Of course, my name is Jennifer, but his name is James. So, I don't share that bathroom with anybody. I haven't seen that charm in years. How did that show up on my floor? For me, that's a physical manifestation of spirit that I can't explain, but I am not calling it a coincidence. That's a message from my dad saying, I got you. So it's cool stuff like that, I love that. I keep that J now wherever I go.
That's a great story.
Yeah, listen, it's hard to shock the medium.
Well,
and,
Here's one for
That
you.
was a shock to me.
Maybe this is a silly question, but if you think it is, I'll give you another level to why I'm asking. But here's the question, Jennifer. Can you sense and be with your own spirit?
Oh, yeah. It's important. It's part of I would consider it like Spirit 101.
Well, let me go one level more. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it. Can you be with parts of you from either the past or the future, a childlike version of yourself, or in other words, that you know that it's you and your spirit, but from a previous part of the timeline? Does that make sense?
So I don't get a lot of bubble up things like that. I know. So the ability to look at past lives, I do believe you have the ability to do that. That's why you have deja vu. I do believe that. Do I personally want to look at all that stuff? To be honest with you, I don't want to know about the future. I don't, and I've already lived the past. I really have no desire to go there. But if I did, I could, because the spirit is capable, of all things, of all knowing and all perspective.
The reason why I ask is somewhat selfish, Jennifer, and we'll haul it into a different direction here just because I want to fill in some of the blanks that we've left as we've gone to talk a little bit more about the work that you do and how you got into that. But I'm absolutely convinced, not so long ago, I had a really profound experience where I was with myself as a child. Mm-hmm. And I can remember exactly where I was and looked over, and I know that there was nobody there, but I still saw him. Mm-hmm. And I remember him looking up at me and basically going, dude, what the hell?
Yeah.
What the heck's happening? And I just absolutely fell to pieces and remember him just kind of going, it's all right. Like it's okay. We can start again from here. I'm still with you. And it was so vivid. I'm getting emotional even just trying to talk about it now. I've tried to make sense of that a little bit, but I perceive that to be kind of getting back in touch with my own essence and my own spirit, if that makes any sense.
Yes, and it's such a part of it. I mean, there's such a connection with the spirit. Its only purpose is to bring love and healing to you and to this world. And whatever method it takes for you to get your spirit wake-up call, or whatever catalyst needs to happen for you to go beyond the physical world, is different for everybody. But make no mistake, it is an important journey that I hope everyone chooses to take, because it is a life that leads to more fulfillment, even in the midst of chaos.
Well, one of the things that has helped me to be able to get to those moments more often, I think, Jennifer, there are two of them. One is called a healing meditation, and another one is called essential meditation. And they're both from Jennifer Farmer on her YouTube channel. And so I want to thank you publicly for those. When you're looking to explore something and you're trying to find something that resonates with you, and there are all sorts of materials available, but it's interesting how, as you try to sift through that in whatever it might be. Here I'm talking about, meditation and spiritual connection. It could be trying to, match up with a personal trainer, or, who you buy your next car from. It's just, in terms of what matches. And when I was going through some different guided meditations and things like that, I would look at the titles and I would listen. I thought, that voice just, it doesn't quite, no, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just doesn't resonate with me. There was something about those two meditations and just hearing your voice that just immediately started to change my physiology. And those two, which I'll post along with this podcast when it goes up, in case anybody else would like to investigate, I would encourage them to do that, have been absolute staples for me. I go back to them on a fairly regular basis. Why do you think that is, that I would have felt that kind of a connection with you?
Well, I'm like you. I mean, I've meditated. I've probably meditated for over 20 years, on and off. And the vibration of the person has to resonate with me. And when I went into the studio to record those, I really did a lot of prayer work around that whoever's supposed to hear this, whoever can be healed by this, that they experience from the vibration in my voice at those moments, that the right healing tones be provided. And so each one is different. You know, I always say I'm not for everybody. I talk a lot, I guide people a lot in the meditations, and some people like silence. And so the fact that you were able to attune to those vibrations were perfect. And I'm glad you found them. And those were written just for people getting started. I actually wrote that for those reasons, because people that I've met and I've helped with their practices over the years, number one, getting people to relax is so hard. I mean, you just got to give them a red wine and 2 Valium, and just to get them into the place, because everybody's so keyed up in our world. Everything's right now. And so getting people to feel comfortable in their own body, in their skin, that's really what my goal was with those. And the timing is so important. And I encourage you to explore different ones too. You'll find that sometimes as you go through your growth in meditation, that I always encourage the folks that work with me, hey, try these guided ones, but really then try to sit in silence for a while. Like, try both, because you want to have the adept and the mind control to do both. And that was my goal with those, is to help people know that you could do it quickly and you didn't have to sit in a corner for 45 minutes, because I'm not one of those people that can do that. Like, 12 minutes and I'm like ready to pop up out of my chair. So I know that with your support and, enjoying those, I'm glad you are, and hope you take it further, even beyond mine.
Well, I'm certainly trying to and exploring it, and the process does evolve as you've described, but I'll come back to those. They help reset me. And this is something that's come up on this podcast before, Jennifer, with other guests, and I think it touches on something that you alluded to earlier, that it amazes me that you could, to take a somewhat cynical view, you could say, well, a video on YouTube, it's just a recording. But it amazes me how you can still sense some sort of a connection, even when you're completely removed from that person, both in terms of geography and in terms of time, of when, you created something, in this case, that it was years after the fact that I accessed it. And yet then you still are able to just sort of sense that energy that almost seems to be imprinted on it, and the connection, despite those distances in space and time. I'm not really forming that into a question, but I think it kind of goes to what you talked about earlier, doesn't it? About just that feeling of connectedness and intuition in all things.
Well, remember, at a spirit level, we're all the same.
Yeah. Right?
And so just like in the human form, like where there's human development, you're in the womb, you're going to grow legs, you're going to grow tissues, you're going to grow bones, muscles, and tissues, that kind of thing. The spirit baby, the spirit self, has its own birthing process, right? And it's the same for everyone. And it's the techniques of awareness. It's the ability to sit in reflection and stillness. It's the ability to open your mind to perceive new ideas. It's an ability to start to sense and feel things, not just at a physical level, but an extrasensory level. These are the stages of spiritual growth. And that was my hope, is that whenever I wrote these, I remembered how difficult it was for me to get grounded enough to understand, or for me to get centered enough to relax, focus, and let go, which is what it takes for a good meditation practice. And I wanted to take the newest of newest and to help the ones that were coming back, not to give up, that you could always resurrect the spirit within, because it was here when we got here, and it's going with us when we leave.
Well, now you've started to talk a little bit about the process of the work and how it comes together. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that I'd like to kind of go back and fill in some of the blanks about how this turned into your life's work to begin with? Because you mentioned about a pretty significant amount of time working in corporate America, which you said you enjoyed, and talked about some of the early experiences from when you were 5 or 6 years old and sensing the presence of people, having that make you feel slightly uncomfortable, to telepathically communicating with your friends in your mid-teens. Can you describe for me the process, Jennifer, of how life kind of took you through the next few stages to where you eventually landed at where we started as an intuitive medium and spiritual teacher is something that you do as your life's work? How did that evolve?
Well, let me assure you, I wasn't planning on it. It wasn't something I just woke up one morning and said, ta-da, I'm going to talk to dead people. That was not my plan. For me, it was somewhat of I would call it an inner journey of awareness. The first step for me, I think, that I can't really go is the death of my father was tragic to me. He was the love of my life, and he was how I connected to this world. And there was a time that I wanted to die. I had plans to do that. And I'd come to sort of this place where, okay, I don't want to be here anymore. God, you can take me. And then, I had somebody reach out and help me. And at that moment, that was a key factor in my life, that something bigger was going on in my life, or something was bigger available. Because, I was hitchhiking down, a road on New Year's Eve, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life after my dad died. And I'd been drinking, and I'd really been screwing my life up. And I just said, I'm done with it. So if you just either let the next car stop and help me, or I'm just going to step out in front of it, because I'm way done with this.
Can I ask you what age that was for you when that was going on, Jennifer?
I was 17, 18. I was 18 probably. 19, let's see. He passed. I have to think about this for a second, because I was in my late teens. I was probably 19 at the time.
So you're still fairly young, and you hadn't been really exploring the telepathic abilities and things for very long at that point. Oh no, I've been
partying my head off. Okay. I've been having a good time. And so when my dad, and the partying helped, it helped anesthetize some of those empathic abilities and things like that. And of course, I don't drink or do any of that stuff now. But at that moment when my dad died, I really figured that's really where my life took a whole new path. Because at that point, I realized I couldn't, in my greatest scheme of plans, drink myself to death or kill myself. At what I was at capacity for. And so when that person stopped the van and said, ma'am, do you need some help? It's kind of like I knew at that moment that was a decision I was going to make, to either live or die. And I do believe that at some point the spirit does make a decision. Are you going to live or die? Right? And so through that, at that point, I began to, grow up and mature, and I got into, relationship, had children, had a son, got a job, tried to be a good mom, started to meditate, and really decided that there was something more important for me to do. And I started to study spiritual material. Somebody gave me a book, something I would have never picked out, some woo-woo book. And I really was drawn to it, and it really started to make sense. And I started to reading other books that were about spiritual growth and about meditation. And then I looked at opening the channel. And so for me, it came through the decision. I feel like my process really started when my dad died, in that sense, because I had to find another way to relate to life. But the second was my motivation to be a good mother and to be available and to do things different than what my parents did, and to be spiritual minded and to practice spiritual principles and to choose spirituality as a way of life. And for me, that's what I did. And through choosing spirituality and meditation, that's when my gifts really began to unfold. And through that process, little bit at a time, I began to know what energy was. I could now look back at my life and know what telepathic abilities were. I now knew that there were people that had these, and I became aware that I had them. And then I started to practice them. I'd go to school, to different schools in the UK. They didn't have any schools in where I lived that had any mediums or psychic abilities. So I looked for the best and found some schools. Started to go to school, and it was somewhat of a leap of faith for me to leave my corporate job. I knew that I was meant to do. Knew I was meant to work with the spirit. I knew I had seen the spirit world. I knew I could communicate with people that had passed. I did practice readings, and I just took a leave of absence from my job and said, I'm going to give it, 30 days and see what unfolds. And then I got an opportunity to leave the company with pay. They offered, not people in my position, but I asked for it and they gave it to me. So it took 6 months, and read for people and said, I'm going to try it for 6 more months. And that's been, 10 years ago. I've been reading and practicing. I'm going to do it 6 months at a time for 10 years. But that's the single mom in me. I had to feel safe to leave that corporate job, to know that I could take care of myself financially and give my son the kind of life that that world had given me. And it has. I was able to take a leap of faith and partner with the spirit world. And I just am lucky enough to get to do what I love and help people in the process get through their grief and loss and help them find a way to start their life again, whether it's in personal development or spirituality or connecting to their loved ones.
How has your journey, and I'm taking a bit of a leap in guessing of the level of communication that I'm supposing that you probably have with your son. I wonder if you're guessing at what this question is, but I'm curious about what effect, if any, it's had on his journey and how it's influenced him.
Well, he's a skeptic. So it's been great because even though he's been skeptic of my abilities, he just is a real logical young man. He's very, you got to prove it. And the cool part about it was I just let him know things, let him see things. I'd call him at times when he was getting himself in trouble and, hey, check on him. He said, Mom, you always just knew when to call. And sometimes I knew I was calling when I needed to call, and sometimes I called because I had a feeling to call, right? And over this past year, I've been fortunate enough, he helped me on some of my projects, and he got to see me work live in a group. And you know what? He received me well. And my goal with him is to help him understand that he has abilities and that he has a spirit that works, and hope he finds his spirit self. And he's 23 now, and I'm happy for him that he is moving in that direction, to understand what abilities are, how you pick up people's energy, how you read people's energy, what you feel about situations, how to handle your own energy. For me, I guess my education for him is not so much the spirit world, but as energy management. That's, if I've affected anything on him or impressed upon him, it's his ability to read energy, perceive energy, and manage his own. I think that's what I'm leaving behind on that for him. That's what my hope was.
Can I explore energy management just a little bit more before
yeah.
I wrote that term down as soon as you said it, and I thought of a couple of different potential interpretations of it, and you already gave a little bit of a description, but I mean, I guess the natural default would be to think that, a person has a certain amount of energy and how do you manage that? But then I guess picking up in the energies and intuitions of all the other spirit around us, a little bit of both and perhaps something else. What would you say to that?
Well, as far as energy management goes, you got to remember the spirit or the higher self it's inexhaustible, meaning it always is it's like the sun that rises and falls, right? It's this, right, the sun rises and the sun sets no matter how it feels, right? The spirit rises and sets no matter how we feel physically. If we invite the higher self or the spirit vibration, if we bring awareness to that, it will always rise. So that's number one on energy management, is understanding that you do get to put your own charge on to things by your own energy and awareness of that. Perceiving others' energy is recognizing one of the biggest key indicators is when you're drained. You know, are you giving your energy? Are you not receiving energy? Are you around people that are angry all the time? And recognizing how to care for yourself in those environments and what that looks like. And how to not take it personal. And how to maintain healthy relationships when energy balance is off between people. Those are important. And then the last piece, just seeing the spirit world. Wow, that's like a whole nother balancing act. Where I really get to see that a lot is when I'm working in groups, or when I'm working individually, one-on-one with people, and then I become the middleman. And so now my energy is clear and balanced. I become a receiver. Then I got the person in front of me, and then I got people from the other side, the invisible world. That's like a traffic control center, right? And trying to interpret, perceive, and communicate energy management. And I think people forget that these days. I think people push their logic and their physical side so much that they forget that they have the spirit, how to activate the spirit within, and use that as your energy battery. There's nothing better than joy, like the essence and the vibration of joy. It's something that is a fuel. It's an energy and a fuel that if we can find joy within ourselves, even with one or two things, that could give us the energy for us to go through the whole day. You know,
you're talking about accessing joy, though, from an energy, and I guess I'll say an inside and an intuitive sense, as opposed to the situation that you described when you were in your late teens, right? Looking for joy by pouring drinks down your neck.
No, listen, I was looking for joy. Well, that's right. I was looking for happiness, but that wasn't there. But creating joy and realizing that the spirit within us, each of us, it's not the physical world. It doesn't live by the same laws of humanity. It lives by spirit laws, which is good, which is power, which is resurrection, which is light, which is inclusiveness. It is joy. It is the vibrations of our spirit within, and those are part of the actions. And when people are talking about, I love this. People say, "Oh, be the change you want to see." Okay, sometimes you have to act better than you feel. So if you want to see more recognition in your job, you're not getting recognition. Well, how do you get recognition? As you begin to recognize, the recognition within yourself, and you feel grateful that you have a job that you can go to practice learning how to be joyful in situations that aren't joyful. Yeah. I hope that's helpful. It
is, and Jennifer, we've barely scratched the surface here, and an hour has flown by, and I'm so grateful for your time. But while I've got you, and I just want to thank you and acknowledge that, like everybody else, I mean, I've had my adventures that have brought me to the place where you described after you lost your dad. Yeah. And so I have my own version of what that feels like. And there were a combination of things that helped pull me out of that quicksand and move me forward into the version of myself that I am now, which is happier, healthier, and feeling more fulfilled than I can ever remember. And I always considered myself to be a pretty happy person. I just didn't know that. Anyway, not to get too far down that rabbit hole. But yours is one of the voices that helped pull me forward. And I share that with you because I want to thank you for that publicly and acknowledge that, we just don't know what kind of effect we may have on other people. And, this podcast would not exist if it weren't for the voices like yours that contributed to, you were like one of the person that stopped at the side of the road that night when you were at that point. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, and I'm not trying to make this about me so much, but for somebody that's listening, is that, it's so fulfilling that you and I here are now talking, and enjoying an experience together, that it's almost inconceivable for me to think back to how I was several years ago, that I'd ever be having this conversation with you right now. And so I mentioned that so that anybody that's maybe listening that really is having a hard time, you've described your situation to some degree, and I've given a little bit of a glimmer of mine, but I hope that it gives some people hope. And I certainly want to encourage you, and I want to thank you for everything that you're sharing so far, because I know from personal experience it's making a big difference for people.
Thank you so much. Oh my God. Like, I don't do it for the accolades, but listen, I'm taking it. Gratitude. Thank you. Yes.
Jennifer, thanks so much for the time. I hope we can do this again. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
To learn more about Jennifer, her meditations, her private readings, calendar of upcoming events, and her online store, visit her website at jenniferfarmer.com. That's spelled exactly like you think it would be, jenniferfarmer.com. You can also find her on Twitter at jfarmerllc, and on Facebook at facebook.com/jenniferfarmerllc. Of course, those links are listed right at the top of her main website, jenniferfarmer.com, as well. And you can also find her on YouTube. The link from that also available through her main website, or just go to YouTube and type her name in, and you'll be able to find that. Again, a reminder, she's made available to listeners of the No Schedule Man podcast that Healing Grief Meditation Practice video. You can find that on the show notes blog post for this episode, which is episode 26 of the No Schedule Man podcast, and you can find that at noscheduleman.com. That's the home for all things that I do. noscheduleman.com or kevinbulmer.com will take you to the same place. All my social channel links are up there. You can also hop on our email VIP list at noscheduleman.com as well. I'd be grateful if you'd share and subscribe this podcast on YouTube or SoundCloud, or subscribe or rate or review it on iTunes. Just go to any one of those platforms, search Kevin Bulmer or No Schedule Man, and you'll find us. Thanks again for spending some time with me and with Jennifer. Until next time, remember, no plan is all part of the plan. Sometimes you just gotta let go. I'll see you next time on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.